This time on Poll Hub, has Dems in disarray become rifty Republicans? I don't know, I invented a word there. Anyway, we're looking at the way the last 10 days has put Republicans on the defensive, or not. Have to check in with Liz Cheney to see what she thinks. Then childcare in America. The cost is only part of what is making it a crisis, especially post-pandemic. Finally, as the summer comes to a close, we're looking back to see how many Americans used to visit their ice cream store. Now, as a former manager of a Baskin-Robbins, I will have something to say about that, so you're gonna have to stick around. And hi everybody, welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Marengoff.
This has been a crazy 10 days, and we've said that so many times on this podcast over the last few years, but a crazy 10 days that, if you want to say, started with the FBI's search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, I think that's a pretty good place to kind of stick a marker in it. And one of the things that has resulted over these last 10 days is there has been something we really haven't seen much since January 6th, and that is distance in the Republican Party between some people who back Donald Trump and everything he's saying about this search and all the other things, and some people, Republicans, who are not. Is this temporal? Is this short-term, you think, Lee? Or is this a real thing that we're beginning to see a real kind of rift, a real separation in the Republican Party between Trump, everything, all the time, on board, and you know what? We need to move on.
Well, I think the question is, what is Donald Trump's future within the Republican Party? We know he still dominates everything, but the question is, does his political future have legs, as it were? And that's still a big question mark. But you hear, I think a lot of Republicans are saying that if I am going to have any kind of national spotlight, thinking ahead to 2024, Donald Trump either is in the picture or he isn't. In any case, I've got to have a place to stand. And so you're hearing things like, stop picking on the FBI, the Republicans, because they're afraid that this, defund the FBI may do for the Republicans what defund the police did for the Democrats. So there's some people out there, even the former vice president, who is saying, let's stop doing that. These are important people and they do a great job. So there's a division along the messaging, which I think is just occurring, but hasn't formed. I'm not sure we know where it's going. We know that Donald Trump still commands a lot of primary voters. And Liz Cheney, as you mentioned in the opening, certainly can attest to that in terms of what happened in Wyoming.
Well, and I think, Lee, you make a good point when you mention the word primary. I think when we look at a lot of the numbers of who's kind of still on the Trump side and who's not, it's a very small proportion of people who identify as Republicans who have moved away from the Trump bandwagon. But I think where you do see dramatic changes is among those people who consider themselves to be independents, but then lean Republican. And so when you're seeing that kind of difference, I'm not so sure there's a dissonance among Republicans as much as there's a difference in the focus. When they're focused on the primaries, and we're going to see a lot of this right after the midterms, as people start stirring up for 2024, you're going to see a lot of Trump backers. You're going to see a lot of discussion in the Trump narrative. But for those who have to appeal to a broader constituency in general elections, that's not the road to winning.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with the Republicans who are kind of standing up. They're in the Senate, like Mitch McConnell and other senators.
Yeah, they're not in redistricted, districts that
Congress,
in Congress.
And for the most part, they're also not up for re-election. I mean, one of the things we're seeing this week, I think that's also, highlighted this Republican, the rifts within the Republican Party, if they exist, or to the extent they exist, is what we've seen in some of these Senate Republican primaries, where the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, the group that spends money on behalf of Senate candidates, has pulled money out of states like Arizona and Pennsylvania, and some of these states where the Senate candidates who have won statewide primaries, who have been very tied to Donald Trump, are now seen as less likely to win the general election. So there's a lot of things going on here. One thing I did want to mention about the Mar-a-Lago search and some very limited polling that's been done. Morning Consult political poll from August 12th. 49% of Americans approve of the search at Mar-a-Lago, 37% do not. 54% say the search was conducted because of mishandling of classified information. But let's keep in mind there's a huge partisan split. 69% of those identified as Republicans in this poll say it was politically motivated. So one of the things that's interesting about these numbers to me is that 54% said the search was conducted because of mishandling of classified information. That's about the number I think that we're kind of at in most polling of people who disapprove or used to disapprove of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's handling. It's in that 50 something percent range.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that baked in number of 35 to 40% of Americans in polling who just are with Donald Trump. And that's not going to change. And that's kind of what you're seeing in this poll, because we've been focusing a lot on the Biden approval rating, right? Which has been, not very high in Trump range. But I think that's different, that the people who are disapproving of Biden are different from the people who are approving of Trump. That may be confusing, but that's where I was trying to get.
These are not those people who were the Barack Obama, Donald Trump people who swung back and forth. This is a big wall, if I can use that expression, separating these folks. And I agree with that totally.
Well, there is overlap. I mean, if you look at party identification, Republicans generally approve of Trump and disapprove of Biden. But there is this very significant group of voters who have varying opinions on both of those topics.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out the question, though. Liz Cheney's not going to end up in the Dust Bowl of history right now. She's actually sees herself as having a future path. She's obviously going to be very visible in the remaining hearing for January 6th. But as we think ahead to the Republican Party, there's a lot of speculation about Liz Cheney and what's she going to do. And I don't know. I mean, she seems to be tossing the word 2024 around periodically, not denying that. Does this campaign potentially have a place in a Republican Party primary?
Not right now. I think that's a really tough road. Certainly, she will garner lots and lots of attention, particularly between now and probably January of 2024. So from her perspective, it's certainly a way to keep herself in the public eye. But right now, there hasn't been much indication from the polls or from the votes that the Republican primary electorate is in line with any positions that she really has taken. But I also think that, as you pointed out, Jay, that the number on a lot of these polls is around the mid 50s, and the rest of it isn't in the mid 40s. Yeah. The rest of it is in the mid 30s. So there is a group of voters that are, they're going to be the swing voters. I know there aren't a lot of them because most people lean in one direction or the other, but they do change that leaning depending upon, what the storyline, what the narrative is. And there's still more to be seen on how the Trump saga will unravel.
And that group that you're talking about, that small but vital group, is important because the country's so evenly divided that when you move people 5% one way or the other, you're changing winners and losers in general elections. And I think that's what we're seeing. And some of the things that are going on, like what's going on in Mar-a-Lago, may solidify Trump at his base because they're picking on him, but also may get some independent and some suburban women and stuff like that moving the Democrat way, which is what we're seeing in some of these Senate polls right now.
But this Trump story is unfinished.
It's clearly unfinished, but Barb, your point, I think, is the strongest one in this whole segment, is to say, but this is the Republican primary voter that we're talking about when we're talking about Republicans and rifts. My question to that would be, so what is the Republican primary voter? And I think there are not the same people in that primary group, clearly as not in 2016, but the primary electorate seems to be very, very one-sided right now in the Republican states that we're seeing. And I just wonder if that's a bigger group of swing voters now, or there will be in 2022 and maybe 2024, than we've seen. And a lot of that has to do with that guy you just mentioned, Trump.
And for Liz Cheney, I suspect there's going to be quite a crowd in the Republican primary.
Yes.
So I think somebody called Trump also made hay. How many dozen candidates were in that primary? You don't need a lot of votes to continue.
Yeah, Donald Trump had a 35% lid over, a ceiling over him in 2016. And that sort of grew as time went on. Liz Cheney could do a lot with a third of the Republican vote in a primary.
Or less.
A lot of people, yeah.
Well, the saying goes something like this. It takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes sacrifice, sometimes professional, sometimes financial, and sometimes the two go hand in hand. Data from the Center for American Progress indicates that the cost of center-based infant care in America is about $1,300 a month or $16,000 annually. higher quality infant care costs go up. So, to what extent is access to quality childcare in the United States or lack thereof impacting moms and dads' ability to work outside the home? The team at YouGov took up that very topic, and we are joined now by Taylor Orth. She is Senior Survey Data Journalist for YouGov, and she joins us here today. Taylor, welcome.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, how many Americans are struggling with this issue?
Well, it's affecting a lot of Americans. Our poll mostly focused on, we were asking a national sample their views on childcare. So while we didn't survey specifically parents, we did have a subsample of parents that we were able to ask about this issue. And specifically, we asked how often a shortage of childcare, a lack of access, impacts working mothers and working fathers and prevents them from being able to work when they might otherwise want to. And we find that 71% of Americans say that a lack of childcare, at least sometimes or very often, prevents mothers from working. A significantly smaller share, 36%, we find, say the same thing about fathers. So it's definitely an issue that disproportionately impacts women in the US.
So, despite all the changes that we have seen over time, childcare generally still seems to fall to mom. I know in some households, mom actually becomes the disciplinarian and dad gets to take the kids out for ice cream. But this, particularly after COVID, this has had a pretty significant impact on particular groups of Americans. Can you speak to some of the folks that have actually been significantly impacted by this?
Yeah, I mean, we find a few differences among different groups in our poll. And we find that Black Americans are more likely to say that a shortage of childcare is preventing mothers from working. We also find that women with postgraduate degrees who might, for example, be working jobs that are very intensive, a lot of hours, are also more likely to say this. And women who are working full time. And then also just overall women in general are more likely to recognize that.
So has the difference in the types of work we do also impacted people? I mean, there are some of us who have the opportunity, and we did, all through COVID, to work from home and to work remotely. But there are many people that don't have that option. How, from your opinion, has it been changing how we work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And our poll doesn't, I can't say that our poll gets at that necessarily. But yeah, I mean, the shift to remote work, it's kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it can free up time for women to be able to step in on childcare tasks that they might not have otherwise been able to because they are at home. But it can also, it sometimes slow them down. Cases where they might, if they were in the workplace, in the office, might not having to be stepping away every few minutes to check on a child. Whereas now, if they're the one working at home, that sort of flexibility, I think it can kind of go both ways. So there's pros and cons.
You don't have any of those experiences, do you, Mary?
No, none. Just full disclosure, I have 3 children ranging in age from almost 1 to 9 years old. So this is an issue that hits somewhat close to home. And I wanted to ask you about the survey in reference to the sticker price of childcare. Do Americans get it? Do they get how much it costs to provide childcare outside of the home for the little ones?
Yeah, so this is something I was really interested in seeing if people actually understood how much childcare costs. Because, when I talk to people in my own life, they seemed really shocked when they heard, the cost of it. And so, yeah, we asked people, we gave them a few different ranges of how much childcare costs. And like you mentioned in the introduction, the cost of infant-based care in the US averages around $1,300, although that varies a lot based on where you are in the country. And so we found that only about 1 in 4 people correctly guessed somewhere within the range of $1,200 to $1,600. We gave them a little bit of wiggle room there. And most people, the vast majority, either said they weren't sure or underestimated the cost of childcare. So over half said $1,000 or less that it costs. I mean, some of this is just because, if people don't have children, their children are older, childcare costs have gone up, they might be aware of that. Then I think people are also surprised because when you look at K through 12 school, public schooling, people are really not paying anything out of pocket. And then when you look at college costs, which are, somewhere close to the range, infant-based childcare is around $16,000 annually. If you look at the cost of college, it's somewhere around that. But with college, people can borrow money, take out loans, whereas with childcare, you have to pay these costs up front. So I think it does surprise people. Yeah.
We also see that although we are in a very polarized political time, one of the things that I was really fascinated about in your data was the fact that although there was a wide gap between Democrats and Republicans, a majority of Republicans, 57%, many independents, 70%, and almost all Democrats do support some kind of proposal to address this as a collective, as a government, as a community. So is it that people can empathize, or do they actually know a lot of people in this situation?
Yeah, well, I imagine, having children is definitely something that cuts across the aisle. Republicans and Democrats are parents, so there's definitely that in common. And yeah, I agree. I think I've been looking at a lot of issues recently, trying to figure out which ones kind of get bipartisan support. And childcare is definitely up there. I mean, people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, see it as an issue and back public support, public funding for childcare, like a lot of other countries have, that it plays a big role in keeping women in the workplace when they might otherwise involuntarily.
Well, Taylor, what do you think the future of work, especially for working moms, looks like? No personal, interest in that whatsoever.
I don't know if I'm necessarily qualified to say, but I mean, unless they make changes, I would imagine that the status quo will kind of continue. I think people are, when they're forced to make financial trade-offs between work and childcare, when we set people up in that situation, and a lot of times it's the woman's salary that they look to when deciding, whether or not someone should stay home or go into labor force. A lot of times it's how much is the mother making and is that enough to cover it, which I think is something that might have to change in order for a bigger picture to change. But yeah, I mean, I think unless there's a bigger public investment in childcare, paid parental leave, some of the other measures that other countries have taken to keep women in the labor force, I imagine that things will go on as they are, unfortunately. But still can remain hopeful, as you said, that there's at least among the public bipartisan support for some of these measures. So that's the good news.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that your research has found is that we all pretty much do agree that this is a very, very important issue for working parents to be able to obtain, to find it, and to also afford quality childcare. So thank you very much, Taylor. We appreciate you joining us today and fascinated by your research.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Important topic.
I had the pleasure recently of seeing Mary's two sons devour massive gobs of ice cream. And it raised the question that we saw way back in 1989 in some polling that the Roper Center has archived for us about how often people do the whole ice cream thing. Frequently, occasionally, rarely, or never. And I know, Barb, you're going to say at some point, everybody loves ice cream. Well, it's close. 27% are frequent users, 38 occasional, only 20% say never. So
This is ice cream shop, though, Lee. This isn't ice cream.
shop. I know.
27% frequently for eating ice cream. I don't believe that. I think that would be not a correct poll. This is people who go to an ice cream shop.
The ice cream shop itself, you once were a manager of, I'm told. So anyway,
I was.
Ice cream.
We'll get to that.
Ice cream popular, apparently.
Well, ice cream is very popular, and I always used to cheer ice cream. You scream, we scream, we all scream for ice cream. But people
sounds like something I would say, Barb. Everybody would groan at me.
People, pets. Everybody seems to like ice cream as long as you can eat it, because the cream part can cause havoc for a lot of folks too. But when I saw this question about how often you actually purchase ice cream from an ice cream shop, frequently, occasionally, rarely, or never, I thought of, well, who are you admitting this to? Because I probably, if asked publicly, I would say, occasionally, but the truth is pretty frequently.
Are you now, Barb, this is a news story now, breaking news. Carmelo says that people don't tell the truth to pollsters?
Well, ice cream is one of my addictions, so.
All right.
So ice
it's
cream trucks
pretty
count?
stuff. I'm sorry?
Ice cream trucks, absolutely. Yes,
Ice cream trucks count?
Yeah. So I worked at Baskin Robbins when I was in high school, and that wouldn't be my favorite. And that's what I wanted to, let's go around. I like local ice cream, like where they make the ice cream. And we always, every place we go, I always seek one of those out. And yeah, I'm one of the cream people because I can't really have ice cream, but I can always find a sorbetto or something like that. So, Mary, what in the city is your favorite ice cream shop that you go out of your way to go to?
Oh, wow. Well,
Or ice cream truck?
okay, so I've always grown up with, and we still have a Carvel nearby. So that's where we probably, if we're going to an ice cream shop. But as Lee mentioned, my boys are ice cream addicts. They actually know the Mr. Softy or whatever the ice cream truck is in the neighborhood, what the schedule is. They have made very good friends with the driver of the truck. He's a very nice man. He's amazing. We all know him. But they know when he comes out in the spring, they know when he finishes up, they know what time he comes down the block, and they will oftentimes flag him down from the one block over if he's not going to come down the block. So I would have to say that in our family, it's the truck that is most frequently partaken.
Yeah.
Well,
I
in our
remember when I used to visit my grandparents in Brooklyn, that was the same syndrome. The down 77th Street in Bensonhurst came the truck with the bells glaring and the neighbors
Well,
would
around
come
Marist
out.
College, there are actually a couple of those kinds of shops that make, I think, some of their own ice cream. I know there's one right by the Taconic Parkway and Route 55, and their sign says cow to cone. And so they don't always have a lot of flavors, and they do change the flavors around, but it is real creamy ice cream.
Yeah, there you go, Barb. So it gets back to everybody, regardless of the poll response, everybody likes ice cream, right? There you go.
That's it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Greta Stuckey, Mike Bowler, and Will Promisel.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it will cooperate. Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.